Thank you. Order paper seems to disappear. Oddly. No, here we are. Excellent. So, moving on to our third proposition speaker of the evening, I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Brendan Donnelly. Brendan's a former MEP and the founder of Rejoin the EU Party. He was elected as an MEP of the Conservative Party in 1994, and he stood for election in the London Assembly. Brendan, you have the ears of the House.
Much, and thank you for the kind introduction. I should stress that I'm a former Conservative MEP, and the former applies to both halves of that description. I'm a former MEP by circumstances and a former Conservative by political choice. Eddie George, the former governor of the Bank of England, once said that there were three kinds of central bankers: those who could count and those who couldn't. He obviously put himself in the second category. I've never been a central banker or an economist. I was, however, a classicist at the other place, and I managed to learn to count up to three. So, like Gaul, my speech is going to be divided into three parts, and like Greek tragedy, it's going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think if I've got Julius Caesar and Aristotle on my side, then I'm in pretty good shape to win a debate on European unity. What I would like to begin with, which is what Cicero and Demosthenes and all the boys in the band always say you ought to do, is to begin by flattering the jury or the speaker or the judge in this case. I think is an excellent motion because it conforms with things I wanted to say anyway. The particular thing I wanted to say was when you say this House is in favour of a United States of Europe, that's an important distinction compared with the United States of Europe, because we are involved in a process. We don't precisely know what form this United States of Europe will take. It's something that we've got some way towards, and I'm going to discuss that. And there's, slightly to my surprise, I'll be agreeing a bit more with Sir John Redwood than I might have expected. We have got some way already, or the European Union has got some way towards a United States of Europe. But there's a long way still to go. And the decisions on where the European Union goes will be taken by the democratically elected leaders of democratic European countries. No one will force them into it. I think the idea that there is a blueprint, a timeline. One second, I think I'll be dealing with some of these issues as I go on. I'll be prepared to take something later. There isn't a timeline. There isn't a roadmap for where exactly the bureaucrats of the European Commission want us to end up. It's something that is in flux. We don't know what the end point is going to be, and probably many of us will, well, I certainly won't live to see it. I suspect more of you will. What Sir John has said is right in one sense, because, and this comes to my second point, when you misread, if I may say so, Mr. Chairman, the terms of the debate, of the proposition, you talked about the future. It's not just a question of the future. The process that we're engaged in is one that has already had some success and has already come about. We have a single currency, we have collaboration on common foreign policy, we have a central budget, we have a European community, ECJ. I'm sorry I keep saying we, old habits die hard, and I think I'll have the opportunity to get back into that habit long before I shuffle off this mortal coil. I'm sure Sir John would disagree with me there. But it's not by chance that we have got as far as we have, or the European Union has got as far as it has, in its integration. Because it was set up, and here I very much agree with Sir John, in order to promote an ever closer union. The ever closer union was built into the DNA of the EU. And I agree with him that it was a great mistake of many people who advocated Remain in 2016, that they denied that, because they then laid themselves open to the accusation, you're deceiving the public, you're not coming clean with the public. The European Union is based on the proposition that increasing sovereignty sharing is to the benefit of everybody in the European Union, and above all, that it's a better form of social and political organisation in Europe than that which preceded it. Above all, it's based on the proposition that violence should not be a factor in European relations, and there was an institutional structure set up in order to ensure that that should come about. And so what's happened in the way of the uniting states of Europe, and that's a phrase that I commend to you, the uniting rather than united states of Europe, is that the European Union has been working the way it was set up to work. And I think that's an excellent thing. Let me say something, if I may, about democracy, which is something that Sir John and others raised. I haven't always found very illuminating the discussion of democracy in the European Union in this country. It was well illuminated when a few years ago I was standing for the European Parliament, and I bumped into a friend of mine who said to me rather aggressively, "I'm certainly not going to vote in the European elections because the European Parliament has no power." I gave him 5 minutes of the Donnelly eloquence, which even in those days was a formidable rhetorical weapon. And at the end of it, he was clearly shaken. He turned to me and he said, "Well, you've told me new things I didn't know before. I'm certainly not voting for the European Parliament now. It's got much too much power. I don't want to encourage it." That did seem to me to summarise difficulties about the discussion of democracy, European democracy in this country. 2 points I'd make. One of which is more directly contradicting Sir John than the other. The European Union is much more democratic in its present form than he allows. Decisions are taken in the European Union by the Council, which is by directly elected members of national governments, and the European Parliament. The two work together in a co-decision procedure. That's an important element of democracy within the European Union. Secondly, I think that the idea, which is implicit in many of the criticisms of the European Union, that democracy can only take place at the nation-state level, is a misconceived one. I don't see any reason why an improvement in the present democratic functioning of the European Union, which I'm in favour of. I'm in favour of European parties such as Volt. I'm in favour of European constituencies. I'm in favour of more power for the European Parliament. So I'm at one with those people who think that the democracy of the European Union can be improved. If that were improved, then I think it would be possible to lead to something that would correspond much more to an EU demos. I'm not particularly persuaded of the possibility of an European demos. I am persuaded of the possibility of an EU demos, because I think that as Germany and Italy didn't have a demos until they became politically united, so if we have the right structures in place in the European Union, an EU demos is a real possibility. What Judy has said to us reminds us what the next challenge of the European Union is, and that's defence, geopolitical resistance to problems that come from both sides of the West and the East. We've been talking about Mr. Trump, we've been talking about Mr. Putin. In its own interest, Europe will need to work much more closely together on defence than it has until now. I agree that there are problems, but there are always going to be problems, and the European Union has a record of rising above these problems. In the 1950s, it may or may not have been true that the British representative to the Messina conference said nothing will be agreed, nothing will be implemented, nothing will happen. But it was certainly a view held by many people in Britain in the 1950s. The European Union, over the past 70 years, has proved that to be wrong. I'm confident it can do that again. One final point. I don't always, in talking about Europe, very often quote Mrs. Thatcher. But I will on this occasion, because I think she had a very nice way of saying that she welcomed, in politics, an exchange of views. People turned up with their views and left with hers. In exactly the same way, I look forward to an exchange of views over the rest of the evening. Thank you very much. It's not so much a question of whether you recognise or welcome a United States of Europe. It is happening. I think you'll have to recognise that, and I hope you'll welcome it as well and give the European Union a pat on the back. Thank you very much.